Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2023 Hack Summit. We have a very special panel for you here today. We're going to be talking about Cosmos and Evmos and the Cosmos ecosystem. And we're joined by three excellent panelists, Federico, Zaki, and Nick. And each of them have incredible experience in this ecosystem. This is a particular ecosystem that I'm excited about, just given the momentum Cosmos has had over the last year or two. And we've just anecdotally noticed many projects building in the Cosmos ecosystem. And we're excited to have all of you here as panelists to help educate us on Cosmos. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Ed. Pleasure to be here, talk about Cosmos, what's going on in the ecosystem, and also try to talk about what's going on in the developer ecosystem, which is very important. Yeah.
Great. So I want to give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves. So Federico, do you want to start first and tell us about yourself and your project?
Yeah, I'm Federico. I'm one of the co-founders of Evmos. I've been in the Cosmos ecosystem since 2017. Before that, I was at Blockchain Berkeley, where I met Nick, who was one of my co-founders. Little we know that after a few years, we'll be life will reunite us again and founding members of Evmos. I've also worked with Zaki in the past and had great experiences building on Cosmos. So yeah, really excited to share that today.
I'm Zaki Manian. I've been building in the Cosmos ecosystem since 2014. I am currently primarily working on a project called Sommelier, which uses the Cosmos, which is built in the Cosmos ecosystem, and also doing, I work on Advise Invest pretty broadly across the Cosmos ecosystem.
Fantastic. And Nick, you want to give your bio as well?
Sure. Hey there. I'm Nick, obviously. As Fede mentioned, we go way back, and I've been lucky enough to work alongside him as we've seen Cosmos evolve, develop, and fulfill its initial promises. It's all been almost a decade, I think, since Ethan and Jay kind of put forward the initial Tendermint paper and all the theses that were defined early on. And so really happy to see us here in 2023, still talking about it, and it's more relevant than ever. So, yeah, looking forward to diving in deeper.
Yeah, I am as well. And before we get started on the panel, I'd love for you to just each give us a little bit of an overview of the projects you're working on right now and what your product vision is for what you're creating right now. Federico, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I'm gonna give you a brief intro about Evmos. Evmos is a project that tries to tackle interoperability between smart contracts, specifically around the EVM. So these builds on top of the vision of Cosmos that serves as application-specific blockchains connecting to each other, but and through this protocol that is called IBC, we can now have smart contracts not only transmitting value, but also transmitting data and information across different smart contracts, which is a vision that we're trying to communicate with our community. And more importantly, we see Evmos as the next frontier for the EVM, one where you can have seamless composability and interoperability between these smart contracts.
Thank you. Zaki, you want to go next?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I work on a project called Sommelier, co-founded the project with several other people. So what is SOM? Sommelier is a Cosmos app chain that enables execution of DeFi strategies on other platforms. So right now, our sort of most successful strategy is called Real Yield USD. It is actually operating, the strategy itself operates on Ethereum, on the L1. It provides the sort of best possible yield for stablecoins on Ethereum L1. And it does this by constantly rebalancing. So we have an off-chain computation mechanism, or like that is managed by the Cosmos chain, and then a bridge, and then the bridge is passing messages to the Ethereum smart contracts, which then execute them and conduct trades, move in and out of Ethereum Uniswap V3 positions, trade assets, etc. And so Sommelier is a general purpose platform for DeFi strategies, and like highlights the interoperable potential of the Cosmos technology system.
Thank you. Nick, you want to go last?
Sure, yeah, and I'm going to try and kind of fill in the gaps here and not overlap with what Federico said. I think the main thing to talk about here is that we've got Evmos the chain, but we also are one of the primary contributors to a related project called Ethermint. And Evmos is actually built on top of Ethermint. Now, rewinding back a little bit, when Cosmos first kicked off, we noticed that there was one major issue that would be kind of difficult to solve, and a major roadblock in Cosmos' future, which is that, hey, building L1 chains is difficult. It's a difficult problem. Most developers in the industry are used to building their applications using smart contracts and deploying them to L1s that already are out there, Ethereum, Mainnet, Polygon, etc. And so we noticed that, hey, whereas Cosmos was growing, the developer adoption wasn't taking off as we'd hoped. So we saw smart contracts entering into the developer workflow of Cosmos developers as a necessary piece of the puzzle here. And that's where we picked up this project called Ethermint, which was a community-driven effort until that point, which promised to bring EVM-compatible smart contracts to the Cosmos ecosystem. So essentially, it was an EVM implemented on top of Tendermint and the Cosmos SDK that spoke, ABCI and could basically enable compatibility with all of the EVM tooling that developers are familiar with, know and love today, like MetaMask, Foundry, Hardhat, etc. And so that's Ethermint, and that Ethermint goal was instantiated in the form of the Evmos chain, and hence, fulfilling that kind of initial promise of bringing EVM functionality to the Cosmos ecosystem. The thing that we're excited about is making EVM smart contracts 100% compatible and extendable via everything the Cosmos SDK has to offer. And so, the next major milestone that Evmos is working towards is EVM extensions, which leverage a feature called precompiles to essentially extend the possibilities of what the EVM can do in order to have them reflect, Cosmos SDK functionality. And then, to paint a picture here, one of the major milestones that we're hoping to achieve is cross-chain smart contracts over IBC, which I'm sure we'll be talking about what that is in just a little bit.
Thank you. We'll actually talk about it right now. So, so the next topic I want to talk about is what is Cosmos, basically. So, what is the vision of Cosmos broadly? And then the subtopics are what is IBC and what is Tendermint Core, which is now known as Comet BFT, and how do those all fit into Cosmos? Feel free to take those as you see fit. Anyone want to jump in here and start to address those?
I guess Saki would be a perfect fit for kind of like explaining the original vision of Cosmos and how it's been evolving, I guess, over time where we're now. And we can also talk about Tendermint or Comet BFT and IBC, of course.
Yeah. So the original vision of Cosmos was that it should be easy to build your own L1 blockchain. And then, so there should be a toolkit for building your own L1 blockchain. And that once you've built that L1 blockchain, you should be able to permissionlessly connect to other blockchains as a way of onboarding users, getting assets, transferring value, etc. And so in many ways, Cosmos sort of anticipated the sort of mini L1 world. Also embedded in the Cosmos vision is this idea called app chains. And the idea of the app chain is that the sort of foreseen final form of dApps, of decentralized applications, is not as a smart contract existing on another blockchain, but as its own blockchain, which has sort of top to bottom full control over this ecosystem, over its ecosystem. Though that's sort of collectively the vision of Cosmos. So in order to do that, we had to build a bunch of pieces of software. So one is we have this piece of software that we call Comet BFT. Comet BFT is an out-of-the-box consensus engine. Then we have this thing that we call the Cosmos SDK, which I mentioned previously, which is a toolkit for building custom functionality in your blockchain. So you can customize how staking, reward distribution, economics, token generation, all of these things, but also add functionality like decentralized exchanges, an EVM module. All of these things can be combined. And then we built a permissionless bridging protocol, which is based on light clients. And the advantage of this protocol is, unlike other bridges where you typically have to talk to a team or someone else to connect, anyone who spins up a Cosmos chain immediately can permissionlessly connect to all 50 existing chains. And this can bring you things like stable coins, decentralized exchanges, everything. So like typically people spin up a new Cosmos chain, they take their tokens to Osmosis, they get their token, set up some liquidity pools there, and that helps bootstrap the rest of their ecosystem.
Yeah, it's important to point out what Saki mentioned here is the interoperability of these app chains, because previously on Ethereum or other VM chains, where, as Nick mentioned, you typically have developers that build these smart contracts or dApps that are sitting on top of these virtual machine, like for example the Ethereum virtual machine, but there's no modularity. And for example, the Ethermint, which is this framework for building EVM blockchains, allows you to create different modular instances of the EVM. So you can have like EVM specific blockchains that are targeting specific use cases. You can have some for general purpose. You can also build EVM that is specifically targeting NFTs, and this all is built using the Cosmos SDK and built on top of the Comet BFT consensus engine. And so now that you have these different EVM instances with different smart contracts, you can generate DeFi strategy for these smart contracts and have them be connected via this protocol called IBC, or have these different smart contracts connect to each other and build on top of each other via this interoperability protocol. This is something that it wasn't possible before, and through the interoperability that Cosmos offers, we can now build interchain composability, which is this money Legos that can be connected through multiple blockchains.
Yeah, putting the puzzle pieces together here. So Zaki talked about multiple pieces of software having to be built to fulfill the promises of this promised stack. One of the theses, the core theses that underlies this approach to building chains is the idea of app specificity for an L1. Essentially, going back to Ethereum's first scaling woes, kind of the idea that every application deployed to the same L1 needs to share the same block space, and so demand for a single application might choke out the supply of block space for users who want to use other applications. Right? So like, if application A or dApp A sees wide usage, a lot of traffic, that might mean that those users are more willing to pay for fees for that dApp, which might mean that users of dApp B might miss out on getting their transactions included into that same block. And so what the app chain thesis what the AppChain thesis says is, hey, actually, why don't we give every application its own block space? And in fact, why doesn't every application have a stack that is purpose-built for what it needs to do in order to serve its users as best as it can, which is where those modules that Zaki mentioned come in. Now, leaning on Fede's explanation, there is one piece of the puzzle that the app chain thesis kind of misses, which is like this interoperability between L1s. Now, if you don't have, if you build applications that live on their own blockchains, you obviously are going to need to have this like shared API, let's say, between each of the applications in order for them to talk to each other. And again, as Fede mentioned, that's what led to the creation of the IBC protocol.
Got it. And you mentioned earlier that there's some EVM compatibility, but what about other VMs and rollups? Are those part of the Cosmos vision?
I can talk a little bit about this idea. So, so we have this sort of multi-VM vision inside of Cosmos. So in addition to the EVMs, we have something called CosmWasm. And CosmWasm, the best way I typically explain this to people is like writing Cosmos SDK modules in Go is like kernel mode programming in like a Unix operating system. You have infinite power, right? You can do almost anything. You can change anything, almost anything about how the blockchain works. But with great power comes additional challenges, and it can be sometimes a slower process to develop Cosmos SDK modules than traditional smart contract development. So what CosmWasm offers is more like a user space on top of the Cosmos SDK. You have to switch programming languages, which is a weird thing. You write Rust, and the underlying Cosmos SDK is in Go, but you also get a little bit more of a more ergonomic and potentially less dangerous interface to the code. Also, the Agoric virtual machine has also been integrated into Cosmos SDK and is being developed by the Agoric team. And it is definitely a vision of the Cosmos SDK team to be a better host for various forms of virtual machine in the future. That being said, and then how do rollups fit into all of this stuff? So like one of the interesting things that's happening is the Celestia team has developed an application called RollKit. And RollKit allows you to take basically almost any Cosmos SDK application and run it as a rollup on top of Celestia. So, the Cosmos vision, this sort of latest iteration of the Cosmos vision, as we move towards the upcoming Celestia launch, is this opportunity to like have applications be able to choose whether or not they want to deploy as a rollup or they want to deploy as a Cosmos SDK chain, potentially both. And these are things that are coming to the ecosystem.
Yeah, if there's one thing that the audience should come away with, it's that Cosmos's broad vision is building for optionality for the developer, right? In order to enable the developer to build with the stack that they're most comfortable with and that enables them to serve their users as best as they can. So for example, we don't just stop at, the DA layer, like an application specific chain, like Celestia that offers DA services to other chains, but we also have chains that are purpose built to offer settlement, and they lean on Celestia for DA. And then on the rollup level, you can have VMs that run on top of these rollups, as Zaki mentioned. The VMs themselves are built as Cosmos SDK modules. And of course, since they're Cosmos SDK modules, they can be running any Cosmos chain, whether that's an L1, L2, or L3. And I think, I guess the best examples of this today are teams like Eclipse. They're building, a platform for supporting SVM rollups, so rollups that use the Solana VM. But also you have other projects like Astria and Dimension also launching this rollups as a service model, leaning on Celestia for DA or other chains, basically offering developers the option for what pieces of the stack they want to use. The kinds of problems that the Evmos Core contributing group focuses on are things like, okay, well, we're building this EVM Cosmos SDK module. How do we ensure that applications that are deployed to this novel EVM can talk to applications on other chains that are built natively in kernel space via as Cosmos SDK modules, just to use the analogy that Zaki introduced? Or how do we enable EVM smart contracts to talk to, let's say, Cosmos smart contracts or Solana smart contracts directly? So those are the kind of compatibility, composability, interoperability topics that we're heads down focused on.
Awesome. And maybe you can give it a little bit of context for why is it that Cosmos is heating up so much recently, and why are projects moving more and more to Cosmos, and what makes Cosmos so attractive versus other chains and ecosystem?
I think the main thing is the optionality that Cosmos offers. Cosmos offers the basic infrastructure layer. On top of it, you can choose these different stacks, different kits, different frameworks, as you may call them, to build your application-specific blockchain, and then extend it through SDK module, through smart contracts, through EVM extensions, what we were saying, we were talking about. And so it gives the developer a lot of optionality to build these different use cases, these custom use cases for their own application business logic.
So
Got it.
I think one of the strengths of Cosmos really is, in many ways, we've been slow to execute, but on the other hand, we've been basically right enough to have a good head start. It's basically where we're at. And like, for instance, while many other ecosystems basically ignored MEV as an important issue, almost 2 years ago, Cosmos started working on building a toolkit for application developers to start using to start experimenting with different forms of either internalizing maximal extractable value or mitigating it, or with many different options. And so we actually just released the releases of these improvements to the software stack that allow people to do this have actually made it in production. There are teams like Skip and Mechatech that are actually specialists in MEV in the Cosmos ecosystem, and they've been collaborating with protocol dev teams to do all this stuff. So what I would say is it's mostly the problems that application developers are realizing are really relevant to themselves. They're looking around and they're finding that the only project that's done significant research and development and actually has tools that are production ready and easy and ready to engage with, and there are examples, etc., that are in production, is Cosmos. And I'm broadly hopeful that the most exciting thing I think happening in Cosmos this year is DYDX launching their Cosmos chain, which just entered private testnet this week. And I think I'm broadly hopeful that will be a shining example of what an app chain can be and what it can be done and what can be done in the Cosmos ecosystem. So that continues to be the thing that I'm particularly excited about.
Yeah, just to answer that time question, or the temporal, why now, right, versus 3 years ago or whatever. I think one aspect of it is that there's just more Cosmos chains around today than there was a year ago, even. And that number, number of Cosmos chains launching over time just goes up. There's just exponentially more Cosmos chains a month, right? Not a week goes by, I think, that someone doesn't announce their launch. But on the other hand, and I'll defer to Zaki and Fede on this one, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I get the sense that, having been kind of a lurker around Cosmos for a long time, and most recently a contributor, I kind of got the sense that other ecosystems scoffed at the app chain thesis, like, thinking about, hey, how do you do value capture if you are application specific? Aren't you, limiting the market that your block space can address? But over time, what you've seen is kind of like a proliferation of this application-specific approach to building decentralized applications. So, you have like all kinds of folks in the ecosystem launching their own SDKs, their own toolkits, frameworks, whatever you want to call them, for building application-specific chains within their own platform. So, an example of this is like Avalanche's subnets or the OP stack, etc. And yeah, so I guess this is all to say that today we have more validation than ever that application specificity is desirable and something worthwhile pursuing for a developer.
And I want to go
Great,
back to.
We have time for probably just 2 more quick questions since we're running a little bit low on time. So I just want to add one question for Federico and Nick, which is Federico and Nick, can you talk a little bit about EVM compatibility in Cosmos and how that's achieved, and also, Evmos as it compares to Polaris as well? Any thoughts you have on that? And then I have a question for Zaki after that. So Federico or Nick, feel free to jump in as you see fit.
Yeah, I can talk about the first one. I can explore about the differences with Polaris that recently announced their EVM implementation. So when it comes to EVM interoperability and compatibility, we're talking about different instances over the same virtual machine. Maybe they have different parameters. Maybe they have like different configuration values. And so keeping that optionality, as we were mentioning before, is key for the developers that are deploying these instances of EVM application-specific blockchains. They can do that with Ethermint, and they can do that with other EVM frameworks on Cosmos. So it's important that no matter what, whether you choose to launch your own layer 1 app chain, or you choose to use, for example, Rollkit to deploy your EVM as a rollup with Celestia, you can have that interoperability between smart contracts using IBC. And for that, we are extending the EVM through our EVM extensions that would allow these developers and the smart contracts to talk to other smart contracts via IBC, to send transfers via IBC, and more importantly, so that you can build IBC applications using Solidity, which is something that that would allow an additional language, programming language in Solidity. You can use Viper to deploy your smart contracts that are talking to other smart contracts on other chains. And so we see that as a major milestone of the Cosmos ecosystem that was previously constrained only to the SDK and to Golang itself for building these IBC applications. So now with these IBC-enabled dApps, through these EVM interoperability, now you can expand the user base of developers and also use cases that are going to be using this interoperability on the EVM side.
Yeah, not sure if my numbers are up to date, but essentially, in brief, bringing EVM compatibility into Cosmos unlocks developer mindshare for Cosmos in the order of like in the order of magnitude, like one or two. By an order of like one or two. Essentially, from let's say there are a number of like 100 like Cosmos developers in the hundreds. There may be one or two orders of magnitude above that of EVM developers that now have access to building in Cosmos. And now on the Polaris question, yeah, going back to the earlier point of bringing optionality and basically maximizing that, I think that multiple implementations of EVM and Cosmos are essential, and it's really exciting to see that there are several teams building towards this like grand vision. Obviously, Polaris, built by the Berachain team, has the benefit of like being able to see the gaps that Ethermint doesn't fulfill for developers, and being able to fill them in. As far as I can tell, the main differences between the two are in the way that they handle precompiles, but ultimately the existence of two or even more future EVMs on Cosmos can only be a net positive for developers. Another exciting development, I think, just to add to the bucket here is, I think I mentioned Eclipse earlier, building SVM rollups. And what that means implicitly is that you can actually also run the EVM there, because there is an EVM developed by Neon Labs that runs on top of the SVM. So like there's actually 3 different implementations of the EVM that are going to be running in Cosmos, and hopefully we'll see more as time goes on.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think the high tide raises all ships, and I think if we can bring more awareness to Cosmos through new tools and technologies, everyone benefits. Zaki, this is the last question for you. What is the future of Cosmos? Where are we headed as a Cosmos ecosystem?
So I think that there's basically a set of, so I think we've talked a lot about what was good about Cosmos. I also think Cosmos, had a major setback in general with the collapse of the Terra ecosystem in 2022. Terra was a huge economic driver, and for the rebirth of Cosmos to really happen, we need to find similar economic drivers or replace the economic drivers in the ecosystem. And so what I think, I'm very excited about, I mentioned DYDX. Another project I advise is Noble, which is bringing USDC and other conventionally asset issuers to the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think there's like those pieces of infrastructure, in addition to like what, new EVMs from Polaris, from sort of the Polaris family tree, Solana VMs, all of these other things, a lot of exciting DeFi protocols like Sei, collectively can bring the kind of sort of like rebuild liquidity, rebuild utility, onboard lots of counterparties onto Cosmos, and create there's like a very significant opportunity unfolding over the next sort of 12 to 18 months in Cosmos, for Cosmos to sort of leap out of kind of its like large developer mindshare, but minimal user mindshare state, into something that is widely used and accepted and essential infrastructure for more of the cryptocurrency space.
I agree with you. And just anecdotally, I'll just confirm that, just through my own observations, as I've met founders over the last year or two, I found that many of the most talented developers have been embracing Cosmos. So I'm also bullish on the ecosystem. So thank you, gentlemen. It's been a great panel. Thank you for educating us all about Cosmos and IBC and your projects. And we're just grateful, and we're hopeful that Cosmos continues to thrive. So thanks again for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Ed. Pleasure to meet everyone and talk about Cosmos and the future.
Thanks all. Lovely to be here.
Thank you, Nick. So